We used to carry whole albums in our pockets, rewinding, fast-forwarding, hearing the gentle whir of magnetic tape. The cassette tape was more than a format, it was a vessel of memories, mixtapes, bootlegs, and counterculture. Today, we rewind that story. Welcome to Retro Treasure Unearthed. In today's trip through audio history, we'll dig deep into the cassette tape, how it originated, rose to global dominance, shaped music culture, then faded, and yet, why it still clings to life in niches today. Let's pop the shell and spin back in time. Though magnetic tape recording predates the cassette, the compact cassette as we know it was born in the early 1960s. In 1962, Philips engineer Lou Ottens and his team unveiled a prototype of the compact cassette. In 1963, it was formally introduced at the Berlin Radio Show. Philips' decision to license the format widely and affordably, without heavy royalties, helped it gain broad adoption. Initially intended for voice dictation and simple recording, it gradually found its way into music. The first mass-market pre-recorded cassette titles appeared around 1965 to 66. Through the 1970s, improvements like Dolby noise reduction, chromium dioxide tape, and better tape deck mechanisms raised audio quality, making cassettes competitive with vinyl. A major turning point, the introduction of the Sony Walkman TPS L2 in 1979. Suddenly, cassettes weren't just for home stereo, they were portable, personal, a soundtrack for walking, commuting, traveling. In many markets during the 1980s, cassette sales overtook vinyl records. Culture, politics, and music intertwined with cassette culture. In the 1980s, the music industry launched the "Home Taping is Killing Music" campaign, warning consumers about copying music on blank tapes. Yet that same spirit fueled underground music scenes, cassette bootlegs of live shows, mixtapes traded in dorms, DIY distribution in punk, hip-hop, ambient, and experimental genres. In parallel, alternative cassette formats and experiments appeared, e.g. DC International by Grundig in 1965, but many failed to compete with Philips' compact cassette standard. Over time, cassette manufacturing improved, tape formulations, deck precision, auto-reverse, longer playtime shells. But by the late 1980s and 1990s, new digital formats loomed. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, chances are you remember making or receiving mixtapes. That slow flip of the shell, the notion of side A and side B, waiting while a track recorded, hoping the tape didn't eat your music. I remember making a cassette for a road trip, burnishing the tape on a pencil to tighten slack, labeling with a hand-drawn cover, and listening in a car with clicky buttons. Sometimes it jammed or distorted, each flaw had character. In high school, passing mixtapes between friends was a form of social currency. This is my favorite track, or this is what you should hear. The cassette was intimate and physical. Listening later to those old tapes, with slight warble, dropouts, or hiss, carries emotional weight. The imperfections are memories. But as with all dominant formats, the cassette faced disruption. The emergence of CDs in the early 1980s began the shift: digital clarity, random access, no tape wear. By the 1990s, CD sales surged, and many consumers abandoned cassette decks. In parallel, MP3, hard drive jukeboxes, and later streaming rendered physical formats less central. Cassette players and blank cassettes became niche items. Many consumer electronics manufacturers ceased including cassette decks. Yet in some regions, cassettes persisted longer, especially where digital infrastructure lagged. And in the 2000s and 2010s, a cassette revival, retro, boutique pressings, began among indie labels and collectors. Looking back, the story of the cassette tape is more than nostalgia. It's about democratizing music production and consumption. The cassette enabled anyone to record, share, and archive sound on their terms. It played a role in subcultures, underground music, community radio, and DIY scenes. It blurred lines between listener and creator. Its decline speaks to broader shifts, from analog to digital, from ownership to streaming. Yet its resurgence reminds us that formats carry emotional meaning beyond utility. If you ever made a mixtape, or kept an old cassette player around, drop a comment with that memory. What tape meant something to you? Thanks for joining me on Retro Treasure Unearthed. If you enjoyed this dive into audio history, hit like, subscribe, ring the bell, and let's dig up more relics next time. Until then, keep spinning the echoes of the past.